Okay. Uh, just wait a sec. Once okay, now I'm the
Sir, you
host.
are live and on.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. See
Thank
you
you.
then.
Okay.
Just a minute. Let me put the screen up. Okay. So today we are going to be talking about East African diaspora. So last time we had talked about the North African diaspora. Today we are talking about the East African diaspora. And the interesting part of African diaspora, as I said, you know, the modern human being, till now, all evidence points to the modern human being coming or evolving from Africa. In fact, it's still debated between 1 lakh years ago or 2 lakh years ago, anything between that. Most of the earliest theories talked about the modern human being evolving in East Africa, typically the region of Ethiopia, Eritrea, whatever is called today. Uh, and subsequent theories are talking about the fact it was not just East Africa, which was the place for evolution of modern human being, but certain other parts of Africa too. And inevitably, when the modern human being came about, and inevitably, as their numbers grew, they started migrating. So, if we look at the diaspora, in terms of migration and diasporic studies, Africa is the start to all migration, and typically we can talk about African diaspora. Yet, the field of diaspora came in much later, and there were certain classical conditions which scholars put on diasporic studies. The quest for a homeland. Definitely, when people evolved in a particular place in Africa, that was their homeland. But somehow the quest for homeland got associated with state. So unless a person has a citizenship and a state essentially defined as a homeland, the concept of diaspora only came after that. And in fact, in those kind of definitions, then people without state, like the Palestinians or the Kurdish. Now, even in the Palestinians and the Kurdish examples, there are there is a marked discrepancy. The Palestine state has been nomenclatured by the UN, and yet it is sort of colonized by Israel over the last so many years. Whereas Kurdish do not have a state as it is recognized by the international community. So Kurds are an ethnic minority in multiple states which do not want this state to come about for various reasons. Let's not get into the political part of it or the right and wrong part of it. But the point is, actually, the African diaspora started about 1 lakh years, though scholars argue that the early exodus was a differential of characters and not a step towards the diasporic process. Remember, in academics, a lot of things go in terms of how one defines them. So that's how this is something that I'm repeating from last time. Then, of course, a lot of traders, Arabs were very hardy traders initially. And when they were trading, Arabs were also the who started the slave market, which was taken over by the Europeans. So that's how also migration happened. In fact, I was reading the cities of India, or a large part of the cities which are there in Karnataka. typically originated from Ethiopia, East Africa, from the Bantu tribe. And some of them came as, sailors, some came as slaves. I was reading the etymology of the name Siddhi or Habshi. How did the name come about? And then, of course, the African slave, the Atlantic trade of African slaves, which went in America to European societies. These are all a part of the diaspora. Unfortunately, earlier there were no nation states. So how do these work out has to be seen. So let's first come and define our objectives, background of the East uh, African diaspora, current engagement of the diaspora in East Africa. And let's look at East Africa. So there are, again, how categorization has happened. I've picked up the World Atlas, which defines East Africa in a very generic parameter. Everything on the east side of the continent Africa has been defined as East Africa. However, some scholars put at East Africa as this inner circle, which includes the countries of Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania. Whereas these particular countries, the Zambia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Madagascar, typically fall into the south of Africa. However, a lot of scholars also put these countries as East Africa, which includes Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia, South Sudan. Now, Sudan also becomes a very interesting case study because Sudan recently got divided into the North Sudan, which is, I think, Republic of Sudan or something, and South Sudan. So if we were to say Sudan in North Africa, then South Sudan actually falls into East Africa. Though I would wonder what would be the state of people in the diasporic formations, whether they will call themselves Sudanese or they will call themselves from South Sudan or North Sudan. Is something which I don't know whether any research has happened, whoever has done research or whatever it is. So we are typically looking at these countries as East Africa, this circle. East Africa, Eastern Africa, or East of Africa, Eastern sub-region is where anatomically modern human beings first evolved. And here we are talking about 200,000 years. So, there is still some ambiguity between 1 lakh years or 2 lakh years based on evidence that is being recovered. Archaeologists are still finding, anthropologists are still working out how old is it. They are still working out what routes they were taking when they were migrating, how things happened, and so on and so forth. Between 19th and 20th century became a theater of competition between major imperialistic European nations, which is a state of most of the world. The British acquired what is today Uganda and Kenya, whereas the French settled for Madagascar and the Germans took the Rwanda, Burundi, and so this was Britain. This was Britain. This was France, and this was Germany. Now, interestingly, in all these, Ethiopia was one country which was very briefly colonized. They stood their ground. Somalia was split between the British and the Italians till such time between North and South. So most of the countries got colonized. Ethiopia was a unique case because they fought it back. Tanzania named Tanganyika. Many researchers' work noted that unlike today, political boundaries did not exist in pre-colonial eras. So defining diaspora becomes a tricky task. The Society of East Africa was interactive, trade welcoming. And remember, there were these ethnic communities. There were these tribes. strong linkage to their tribal and ancient culture. African countries again are viewed as a region of mass migration, because if modern human being evolved there, inevitably today all continents and countries which are populated by human beings have somewhere, if we were to do a genetic composition, would have an African component. And that becomes quite ironical when all these countries bring in policies to stop migration. Violent conflicts with Europeans who came as settlers, poverty, and today a lot of Africa, in fact, in between Africa was known as the dark continent, because it kind of closed in terms of news coming out, and there has been a lot of hunger, poverty, a lot of revolutions. Environment stress were among the factors which pushed people from the regions to emigrate. In modern times, region as a whole faces challenges associated with low human and economic development, violent conflicts, political oppression, persecution. And inevitably, we have also seen that, somewhere it becomes a very cyclic process. The whole concept of low human indices also increases political uncertainty, a climate of repression, a climate where, where revolutions are happening, army takes over, and so on and so forth. We know there is a war going on in Somalia still. The war between South Sudan and North Sudan just got settled, and so on and so forth. So let's look at some of the diaspora. Start with Kenyan diaspora. Prominent work on Kenyan diaspora argue that low per capita income growth and rising income inequalities drive many Kenyans. And this is again something that we have seen across when we were doing the Asian diaspora, and we will see as we do the African diaspora. So most of the global South, inevitably people migrate when there is there's a disparity of income. There is a low human development indices. In recent times, business opportunity in neighboring countries have also encouraged many Kenyans to migrate. Something what we see in South Asia. Why do people migrate to the US? A better business opportunity. But here, Africa being such a huge continent, so many countries out there, people migrate to neighboring countries. The neighboring countries in Africa are favored destinations of Kenyan immigrants. Apart from Africa, large number of Kenyans are there in Asia, America, and Europe. Small proportion are in Caribbean, Australia, and New Zealand, and to the extent Pacific region. Again, something we do repetitively over our various last classes. Within Africa, large number of Kenyans outflow of migrants is reported in Uganda and Tanzania because they share borders with Kenya. Geographically, the political borders are linked together. So obviously, there's a flow. Wherever there is opportunity, people will go there. Africa is almost like India. It's a continent. India is a country with states, but when we look at population and this, it's almost like people migrating from Bihar and Orissa to Kerala, or they are migrating from Bihar to Orissa or Bihar to UP. Okay, Aucho in 2013 talked about various phases in Kenyan migration and Kenyan diaspora. First phase traced back to 50s, 60s when people largely migrated to acquire skill and knowledge. Talked about the second phase, got the trigger from the decline in economy and the coup. In this way, many people emigrated to the European countries. Third phase, 1990s to 2000, with the movement of immigrants within the African continent. And the fourth wave, highly skilled, semi-skilled and professional migrating to developed and developing countries. And there you will find similarities when we were talking about the Asian diaspora. Some sort of a similar thing, though Asia had very few coups, but something similar we would see. So Aucho in 2013 study talked about 4 waves of Kenyan diaspora. In 2007, the government established an international job and diaspora office in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Government has initiated a program called Kenya Vision 2030, where diaspora engagement is one. And we also now see very similarities in a lot of global south, where countries are going all out to connect with their diaspora. They have understood the power of diaspora and the resources of the diaspora, and they need that diaspora to engage with the host, with the home country. To engage with the diasporic community, the government have provided them with dual. So Kenya has provided dual citizenship and voting rights. Again, when we look at in context of India and its connection with the diaspora, India is also talking about voting rights. A lot of other countries are talking about voting rights. And it's a very difficult path to tread, because inevitably, if diasporas have all the advantages of a better life and the same advantages of a citizen, how do you manage the politics? So it's a very interesting fine line which countries and the governments have to tread. So it again depends on what is the final consideration, what is the public opinion. So, and we will see that while Kenya has done this, Tanzania has not been able to do it, which shares borders. So I got the website of the Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs of Kenya. And if you see, they have, in downloads, in diaspora, there is something called downloads, where there is a distress help channels for Kenyans in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which clearly says that there is some sort of a distress in terms of the Kenyan diaspora in Saudi Arabia. So, and we will see that there are, we saw that Egyptians had a problem, the Egyptian diaspora had a problem in Saudi Arabia. We are now seeing Kenyan diaspora. So I found this. And then there was something about US diaspora service questionnaire, mobile service register here. So there were all kinds of information which was publicly available for diaspora. And again, as I said, today with internet and digital media, it is very easy for diaspora to not only connect among themselves across space and time, but also connect with the home countries. Then there is this Kenya Diaspora Alliance, a registered trust and federation of over 50 plus registered diaspora organization. And this particular organization was having a Kenyan diaspora homecoming convention in December. 10% off, theme innovation. Don't miss the theme, innovation, fintech, and investment towards 1 trillion. So if you see, countries are borrowing concepts of each other. It's almost like best practices of corporates. Countries are borrowing. Also notice that the picture in frame is a Kenyan young girl, women professional. So there is a gender aspect to it. She's holding a tablet. So how the symbolization happens also tells a large part of the story. Now let's look at a little bit about the Tanzanian diaspora. Countries out migration can be traced to the 18th and 19th century. From slavery to colonization, people were forced to immigrate. Also, one thing that needs to be understood is that inevitably colonization led to the creation of this link between the colonizer and the colonized. And inevitably in diaspora and migration studies, we'll always see that once this link is established, a lot of people emigrate to the colonizer. And in case the country is not colonized, then the migrations are much more difficult to predict. From slavery to colonization, people were forced to emigrate. In recent global perspective, unemployment, poverty has become the driving factors, which again is a a common theme across countries. So they have this Tanzania Diaspora Hub, which is a registered non-profit organization in the state of North Carolina. So inevitably, North Carolina is a red state in the sense it is down south. It's quite possible a whole lot of these people were bought as a part of the slave trade. Remember, Madagascar was a major slave hub. Besides Morocco, on the west side, Madagascar was a major slave hub. And look at it, contributing to Tanzania's, whose aims are to contribute to Tanzania's sustainable economic development by harnessing the potential of Tanzania diaspora for development to increase the community's awareness of their impact on the local environment. So again, as I said, with internet and new media, today a new form of connections or new forms of connections are coming about, which are connecting diaspora to the home countries. Then I got across this IOM in terms of establishment. There was money given for establishment of a Tanzanian diasporic policy. $65,000 was given by IOM to Tanzanian government. Project aims to support the government of Tanzania in enhancing its relation with diaspora to tie its financial, social, and human capital. So this kind of a collaboration is happening. Money is being given to set up a diaspora formation and a policy. What the diaspora wants to be able to enter the country, own land, access financial services, all of which have been considered in the process of special. And this is a May 31, 2023 item, which supposedly is going to happen by the end of 2023. Something what Indian diaspora is able to do, open financial accounts, own land. So, all these countries, as I said, these are almost like best practices which are adopted by various countries now. Then I came across the website of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Sorry. And this is the main site, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and East African Cooperation of the United Republic of Tanzania. And then I got this site of the Embassy of United Republic of Tanzania, Berlin, Germany, where they are having this diaspora, separate page on diaspora. So it's the home country is having a similar kind of communication outreach as the host country. So there's a separate website where this diaspora conference is happening. They have a picture out there. And then, of course, the Tanzania special fix for dual citizens dilemma. It's not yet time for dual citizenship, will be given special status. And if you notice, their passport is talking about East African Community, United Republic of Tanzania. So obviously there is a talk about East Africans coming together on some sort of either an economic criteria or some economic or political criteria or something to that effect. And this is TRT Africa, I believe, a website, and this is a June 2023 article. The third diaspora in the Eastern African we are talking about is the Ethiopian diaspora. Now, Ethiopia is a separate case because Ethiopia diaspora is a post-70 phenomena. There are about 3 million Ethiopians scattered throughout the world, from America to Australia, Norway to South Africa. Majority reside in US, Arab, Middle East, and Israel. So there's a certain amount of African diaspora in Israel too. Currently, a little more than 250,000 Ethiopians live in US. Now, the thing about Ethiopia is Ethiopia was never colonized. Very briefly by the Italians, but it was actually not colonized. Emigration from Ethiopia actually began with the outbreak of the Ethiopian Revolution in 74. Ethiopia had a king. The first wave of outmigration took place during the Haile Selassie regime. Sorry. Haile Selassie was their king when he was, overthrown by the leftist operation known as the Red Terror. And then in the 80s, there was a refugee crisis. In the 80s, there were food shortages and hunger crisis from 83 to 85, led to an estimated 1 million famine deaths, according to the United Nations. So Africa has been constantly under this shadow of revolutions, food shortages, hunger crisis, and so on and so forth, which is leading to, and if we notice when we were doing the North African diaspora, how people emigrate from South, come to North, and then illegally get pushed into Europe, North Europe or South Europe. So this is a map of the forced migration from Ethiopia from 1970 to 2020. So if you see, this was the time of the forced famine, 83 to 80. This was the time where you see these peaks. So around this time, the famine happened. Subsequently, it has declined and it has remained. And again, 2020, it seems to have increased a little bit more. So that is the state of forced migrants from Ethiopia. And these are the common migration routes from Ethiopia. So that's Ethiopia. People go to Yemen and to Saudi Arabia. Remember, there's a civil war going in Yemen too. So people without knowing get trapped into Yemen. They get illegally trafficked, or they go, and all these regions are today, affected. Libya is affected. Egypt is slightly calmer, but the whole Northeast is, Middle East is kind of affected. And then there is this route to South Africa down there, migration routes. And once they go to Libya, remember in the last time unit we've seen, from Libya, they get pushed on to South Europe, crossing the Mediterranean illegally. Not only are people going out of Ethiopia from other East African countries, migrants are coming into Ethiopia. And if you see, look at 1990 as a peak and 2015 onwards. Remember the war in Sudan and various other, conflicts around are pushing people into Ethiopia. Protection, asylum seekers and other concerns to UNHCR at the end of the year. So continuous movement of in and out of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is also one of the 15 pilot countries to implement the comprehensive refugee response framework, a framework which is being which has been tried by the UN, a global shared commitment to improve the lives of refugees and host communities in a coordinated way. Inevitably, it becomes it becomes a moral obligation for any civilized country to take care of refugees if there is conflict in the neighborhood. And today, all countries are so connected that more often than not, in spite of the fact that countries want to work alone, we see that everybody seems to be connected, as we are seeing hosts connected to diaspora, to host countries, and so on and so forth. Its objectives are easing pressure on host countries, improving refugee self-reliance, expanding access to resettlement in third countries, creating conditions for voluntary return. Well, 7 of these pilots are in Africa, so Ethiopia is one of them. Researchers have observed that colonial ties plays an important role in shaping patterns of migration. What I told you earlier, out of Africa with vast majority, and this is the same with Asia also. We've seen uh, uh, when uh, when Britain was occupying India and a lot of South Asia, we see naturally a lot of Indians having traveled to London for studying, to Britain for studying, and so on and so forth. And with the mass majority of immigrants tending to settle in countries with colonial or linguistic ties, having never been colonized, Ethiopia does not share these ties with either African or European countries. And so migration patterns do not follow a well-defined route. So inevitably, people will follow other people who are already in a particular place. People just don't randomly select a country to go to. They would see if there is somebody from that place, somebody who speaks the language, somebody known. It is much easier to then, go to that place and start a life. Historically, many Ethiopians migrated to the Middle East because there is this straight route out there, having been young, uh, have been many Ethiopian migrants to Middle East have been young single females migrating as domestic workers, or sometimes for custodial work in institutions such as clinic and schools. Now, this was something new for me. Women account for about 94% of all legally migrant from Ethiopia in the region. Now, we had all talked about, largely we knew and we had talked about Filipino women workers, but Ethiopian single females working as domestic workers in the Middle East was something new. The men who make this journey through regular channels have often been employed in construction and farm work, or perhaps as drivers or mechanics. In fact, I was seeing this recent song which has been made by one of the Indian female musicians, has been made on Siddhis, called Ye Yere Yere, Yere Yere or something. Yeah. So it's on YouTube. The Siddhi community, and you can see the African features. Ethiopia, over the last decade, has signed bilateral labor agreements with Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE to increase legal migration, but also speed up the returns for those who were unauthorized. So inevitably, this has helped the unauthorized also in response to a rash of forced returns and complaints of abuse abroad. So obviously, there is racism being practiced in the Middle East. The government in 2013 banned Ethiopians from traveling to the Middle East. Restriction remained in place for 5 years. Point ban was lifted. We also saw that with Egyptians. Egyptians were, there was this abuse in the Middle East. So inevitably, irrespective of the fact that you might have, a common single identity, and yet you are different in terms of other identities and a single identity. So a lot of times when we get stuck on to saying that, but they are of this identity and yet they are fighting, there is a very complex mix of identities which are at play always. Recent migration to Ethiopia has increased over recent years, often involuntary, as large number of migrants have traveled irregularly and have come back. Ethiopia is also one of the top financial remitter destinations in sub-Saharan Africa. So Ethiopia also, besides East Africa, is also a part of the sub-Saharan Africa, and they account for about 5% of the GDP. Source of foreign currency and livelihood for many families, as we have seen in South Asian countries and other Asian countries. Were regarded as development partners in 2011-15 Growth and Transformation Plan, government's formation in 2002 of Ethiopian Expatriate Affairs General Directorate, replaced by Diaspora Engagement Affairs. 2018, the ministry also established an Ethiopian Diaspora Agency, a separate agency for diasporas. And again, we will see this pattern common in all countries whose diaspora that we study. Government has incentivized investment at diaspora through tax and custom measures. Decided to open foreign currency bank accounts. Ethiopian banks at one point when provided them with free plots, provided Ethiopian origin ID cards called the yellow card, something like the OCI cards. For individuals who have changed nationalities, the card entitles to all privilege offers by including right to enter the country without a visa. So all countries have figured out that diaspora provide a very important, they do an important role besides remittances. They are a soft power. They are able to lobby in host countries for the country's interest. They have skills which they can share. In fact, I was reading this paper, The Role of Ethiopian Diaspora in Ethiopia by Solomon Getahun, presented at Ethiopian Foreign Challenges. It's available on the net. It's a JSTOR publication. A PDF is available on the net in case you like to download it. Michigan State University. So he specifically talks about the Ethiopian diaspora in the US. And obviously, there's a large Ethiopian diaspora in the US. Okay. Let's sum up. A region of East Africa is not uniform. So is their diaspora. The region is politically divided and each country has its own policies and laws, rising conflict, poverty, political crisis, policy makers and international working for the population to outmigrate in the form of refugees. And inevitably, the refugee problem is going to exacerbate, especially now with climate change happening. And again, as I said, in spite of the fact that the whole world is connected, people and countries and states understand that connection and understand the fact that they need each other to help the humanity out of the common threats faced. Countries still tend to work as lone wolves. And when they will learn is there, it's a call, but the fact is we are all connected. There are some references. Kianji Kinuthia on Kenya's diaspora in the south. There is understanding Ethiopian diaspora engagement policy. The rest of the references and suggested reading are there in your course material. Perceived and actual effects of remittances on poverty, education, and development in Tanzania, a case based of Leicester-based Tanzanian diaspora, University of Durban. Okay. Let me stop this. Any questions? Shesha, I started reading that book on diaspora without homelands. Again, very interesting thing. They say that inevitably, when we talk about diaspora, we look at a state kind of an homeland, a citizenship and a state. So what happens if there is no state? So for example, in Palestinian, for example, the case of Palestinian state is recognized by the UN, but they don't have a sovereign right of a state in terms of the political process or otherwise. And even if Palestinian takes citizenship of, let's say, Sweden or UK, it's not the same. Similarly, for Kurdish, they do not even have a state to talk to. It's a notional state. So the political rights, the ability of being being a citizen of a particular state, and that state needs to be recognized by the international community, also is a big deal. So the whole process of political rights is also a very important identity for human beings. In the absence of political rights, in the absence of a sovereign state, in the absence of that sovereign state being recognized by the international community, there is a sense of non-belonging, and uprootedness for people.
So, I was thinking around for some of these countries in East Africa.
Uh,
Um, these uh, uh, these countries are having facing a militant struggle, like in some parts. So, are these so? Is there some kind of political engagement going between these militant groups as well as their diaspora by any chance? Like in Africa, we know that certain militant groups are very active also, even till date.
See, inevitably, at the end of the day, it is politics which plays out. So it is politics between multiple groups, and the multiple groups work with different identities. Ethiopia was a very interesting case when this king was there in the 70s. This king was a very popular king with the diaspora. I was reading this story about this king being very popular with the diasporic students. And whenever the king used to visit the US, there was people used to come and meet him. He used to spend time. Subsequently, he lost all that kind of attraction due to various reasons, and then the students started protesting against this king, and then the regime hardened its stance towards this diasporic community. So you need to understand, again, when you have an autocratic regime with no outlet of political outlet, that is why political parties and politics plays a very important role in the well-being of a country. Media, for example, is a catharsis. So if you gang up or if you club the media down, if you push the media down, if you put the political process down, things simmer beneath the surface. And if you remember, I think in one of those units, when we were talking about West Asia, when we talked about the Jews and Palestinians, I did make a statement that just because you do not see movement does not mean things are not happening. And right last week, this conflict between Hamas and Israel brought out, obviously, and then I was reading this articles in Israeli newspaper denouncing their government for actually promoting Hamas over other Palestine. So at the end of the day, it's politics. Israel wanted to support Hamas so that it could push down the political Palestinian legitimate Palestinian political organization, so that, see, Israel was also trying to play politics in the essence. Are you able to hear me? Guys, are you able to hear me? Can you hear me?
So we lost you in for a while, but now we can hear you, at least
Okay.
from my side. Yeah.
Okay, because I got a message, my connection was uncertain. So I was reading in the Israeli newspaper, there's a lot of criticism of the Israeli prime minister. In fact, they went on the Israeli newspaper. It was quite refreshing to read that in a war-like situation, the Israeli newspapers are critical of the Israeli prime minister because they said he encouraged this engagement with Hamas over Palestinian political organizations. The Israeli prime minister was trying to be smart in this political, chess game, which has now resulted in this particular conflict, which is again detrimental to all. The whole Middle East is now destabilized. And inevitably, that is the reason why political processes, political parties, a healthy media becomes very important, because these are, these are pressure releases. Kangat, you are right, Russian-Ukraine conflict. See, all these conflicts are basically starting because there is not enough, interestingly, as more and more media is available for communication, I think we are talking less and less. So, Shrestha, again, to answer, coming back to your point, obviously it's a political conflict, and somebody has to sit down and sit down and work as a interlocutor between various organizations. And unless, say, for example, unless India sits down and works out its arrangement, nobody's going to come and help India. Americans are not interested. Russia is not interested. Everybody is looking out for their own interest, which we do understand. Shrestha?
Yes, sir.
So these conflicts will happen. See, again, if you again look at the history of humankind, so other day I was, when I was telling some other teachers, I said, research has proved that human being today is having the least of conflicts in the whole history of humankind. Problem is because we have started getting news in real time, we feel that the world is collapsing. The world was always in conflict. Shrestha?
It's a little funny to imagine that.
Yeah, it was. If you see, look at the fact when modern human being, the Homo sapiens came about and started migrating throughout the world, they killed the earlier species of humankind. They were earlier, the Neanderthals and the other, everybody was killed. Look at the Armenian genocide. Look at, the various genocides which have happened. So human beings have, look at the two world wars where millions have been killed. So human history, and you start from the Roman Empire, you look at the Greeks, you look at the Greek and Sparta war, you look at the fact when Europeans came to America, when Britishers came, forget the British, brought in that famine in Eastern India, which led to lakhs and millions of people losing their lives. In the partition, 500,000 and more people lost their lives because of one Britisher who sat on a map and drew a line and says, this is India and this is Pakistan. So human history is replete with migration. Human history is replete with violence. And yet human being, we are 8 billion today, man. So obviously, I am sure there are much more to it. It's not the end of the world.
That's actually interesting. Yes,
It is.
that.
It is. See, so I was on social media. Somebody had put, a camera which was zooming out of Venice and going all the way up into the Milky Way. I think this was taken out of the Hubble telescope. And as the camera panned out, the earth was just a speck. You could not even see the earth. And the text at the bottom said, did you feel like that you were nothing? That's precisely the case. So it's interesting. See, as an academic, it's very interesting to see how. So what is fascinating me is the fact that the kind of things history is telling about today, diaspora studies about how migration has happened, how countries are engaging with each other, how people are moving, what are the routes they are taking, becomes a fascinating. See, academics becomes a very fascinating way of understanding the world rather than getting involved in very specific, events. You see a larger context of the world, which gets you to understand and makes you feel more knowledgeable and understanding. Shrestha?
Yes, sir.
Any other question? Veera, incidentally, there is this video I saw on the Siddhis called Yera Yera, made by this women musician. You must check it out on YouTube. You last time had mentioned about Siddhis in Karnataka.
Yeah, sir. Yeah, I
So
will
there
check
is,
that one.
Yera Yera karke hai. It's on YouTube.
Oh,
There is
oh,
they have a Siddhi beat and the Siddhi actors.
Oh, okay, okay.
So it's a Siddhi kind of a song with Siddhi beats and the whole traditional Siddhi, thing out there.
Oh, okay, sir. I will check that.
Yes. Any other question? Kangat, you are absolutely right. The Russian-Ukraine conflict has been forgotten. The conflict is still remains, and the focus of the West has shifted to Israel, Palestine. And interestingly, this conflict, I feel, has brought the Palestinian question back on the center stage. So Israel, for whatever it is doing, any modern and especially Jews for having gone through a Holocaust, what they are doing is again not correct in modern conventions. However, they are doing whatever they are doing.
So this can also be argued that this is not the same generation of Jews doing it.
Listen, Shrestha, the point is the interesting part of human, knowledge systems and, the way cultures and knowledge get spread across is the fact that, look at the fact, today, the new generation of Indians and Pakistanis do not know about independence, have not faced the partition, and yet they seem to hate each other. One would wonder why, what, but that's how the collective memory seems to be transversing. We seems to be, trans-historical it has become. We do not know the history, and yet we carry on the scars of history. It's almost like the Africans who, traveled the whole world, carried on what they saw in East Africa. It's kind of weird, but that's the way human beings are. What does Kangat write? When there's a conflict situation in the country, someone has to take action to bring military rule. Again, Kangat, it's not, I wouldn't say it is as simple, because a lot of times, a lot of conflicts are brought about by external mediation, external interest. See, inevitably, Europe and America seem to have an interest in a lot of countries, and we know that they have brought about regime changes a lot of places to the detriment of that country.
So can you name some of those influences? Was it these militant groups which were being supported in Africa?
So, for example, look at the fact that US tried to do a regime change in Cuba. Again, let's not look at it from the point of whether it's right or wrong, whether it is good or bad. The point is US looks at the country's interest. And remember, when we say US, US is not a monolith entry. Whenever a lot of people say, why is India doing this? Remember, the country is not a monolith entries. There are multiple motivations and multiple people's interests which form a government. So, for example, some person in, let's say, their external ministry or State Department or their intelligence agencies feel that something is a threat to that country. Why did US intervene in Afghanistan? So the first time during the 80s, when Russia came in and took over Afghanistan, it was said that it was an entrapment done by the Americas to get US, and that time it was not Russia, it was USSR, to get USSR involved in and Afghanistan is a trap, because Afghanistan has got multiple, ethnic groups and multiple identities. And that is why, remember, we talked about the Afghanistan diaspora not being a diaspora, but a quasi-diaspora, because they have multiple identities they work with. So it's a trap. So inevitably, these are interests. So let's say, assuming an African country has a particular mineral which they want to mine, and the particular regime is not very conducive or not very favorable to that particular country, why would that country want that regime to change? And inevitably, remember, there are multiple motivations which work out. We know that. We have seen it across. We have seen right in our neighborhood how a regime was changed because of interests of major powers. You don't have to go much further. Just your neighbor, how regimes were changed because of various interests. Remember, these are geopolitics at work, and these are very powerful motivations. Shrestha?
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
So it is not as simple as a conflict situation. It could be multiple situations. There are multiple, foreign powers at work. Remember, in the North African diaspora, we were talking about the fact a lot of time the activists unconsciously bring in the Europeans' agenda because you are not sure who's working for what. You will never know.
Yeah. In fact, even in the with China being there was this country with Hong Kong, perhaps I think there were also activists were jailed and they were being called pro-US, and that's why China kind of took a stand against the Hong Kong government.
Hong Kong was a different case because Hong Kong got transferred from Britain to China after their lease expired. Hong Kong was because Hong Kong was under Britain and had expected a certain kind of political and other situation to continue as it is. But because China brought in new laws to change that situation, people protested. There are they, at the end in situations, and remember, China is not a democracy of multiple political parties, it's a single political party, so the situation is much different.
Yes, sir.
So each situation works out multiple ways, and remember, human beings and human societies have multiple identities, and inevitably when you start moving into identity politics, then there are other consequences which come into the picture. And lot of time, how you start and how you end, you do not know. So
Hmm.
it's again, as I said, as an academician and as a scholar, you get a unique advantage in being able to understand multiple things. And in fact, that is why I always, at the start of any class, not just these classes, always other classes, I tell my students, don't start looking at things in terms of right, wrong, good, bad. As a student and as a scholar and as an academician, look at it things dispassionately. Then you will be able to understand, because essentially as a student you are here to understand how things work. Let the politics and the international relation people or the policymakers decide on the politics and the fight and all that stuff. As an academician, you're looking at how things are working. That gives you the unique point of view. Shrestha?
So this also makes me kind of looking at, I mean, we've covered so many classes in for African diaspora, and yet I feel like there is so much more to it. Like we need
Correct.
to
Correct.
go into.
So we have done only 2 classes. One is North Africa, one is East Africa. Next time
So
we will do.
we have had one class before also on East Africa by there was somebody teaching us
Okay.
previously.
Okay. So inevitably, Shresha, again, remember the fact, and I think you already understand that any country you pick, any society you pick, any subject you pick, once you start going into it, or once you have multiple people talking multiple perspectives to it, you will suddenly find you'll start looking at, see, that is the thing what media is supposed to do, na? Give you multiple perspectives. That multiple perspectives allows you to see things in multiple different contexts. That's what academics and knowledge is all about. If everybody is going to be talking the same thing and everybody is going to be talking the same way, how will you get enriched? And always, there is never deterministic in anything. Nothing is deterministic, because as soon as you say one thing causes another thing, It never happens. The world does not work that way. Nature does not work that way. There is no determinism. There are multiple factors. Because we are not open to multiple perspectives, we are not able to see all those parameters. It's like saying social media is the cause of revolutions. Cannot be. How can social media create a revolution? Or how could a particular thing lead to a particular thing? There has to be other options. So think about the fact, how could a state cut off the electricity, water, and food for 1 million residents of a state who they control? Isn't this a war crime? Well, you can decide right or wrong. Shrestha?
Yes, sir.
Okay, any other question? Okay, in that case, do see this Yera video on YouTube. It's about the Siddhis, and have a great weekend. And I'll see you next Saturday with the West African diaspora. Bye bye then.